disclaimer on the agenda page, but just a heads up, if you do not wish to be recorded, feel free to exit now. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us, everyone, for our late July insights. To commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia that we're all meeting from today, and acknowledge their connection to land, sea, and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to those emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'm at home today in Brisbane. I'm on Turrbal and Yugara country. Please feel free to pop in the chat where you're joining us from today. It's always lovely to hear from the group, just how far and wide this audience reaches. We've got a pretty big agenda today, and look, we'll own that this is very training land centric. There's a lot that's been happening within the training package landscape, including new standards for registered training organisations that landed on the 1st of July. We have a training update. Instead of really going through our projects, Phil Dodd is going to walk us through where we got to with qualification reform and some of the other big ticket changes that have happened in the TPOF. Is that right, Phil? Have I got that right? Yep. So Phil will also walk us through that. So a big portion of our conversation today is very focused on the standards, the way in which we make changes to a training package. And there's a lot of different ways that will impact across our stakeholder groups. Obviously, big impacts for the registered training organisations on the call, but also impacts to other stakeholder groups as well. And so Steve Hall will highlight sort of the different areas and why this might matter to you and how it might impact you, depending on what organisation you work for and work with. We also have an update from Peter Adams and Kurt in our policy team. They're going to walk us through the I guess, productivity and economic reform. It was announced by Dr. Jim Chalmers. Apologies, one moment. That the federal government are hosting a productivity and economic roundtable in a couple of weeks' time in Canberra. And so this is really going to, the outcomes of that roundtable will impact some of our strategic priorities and potentially some of your strategic priorities as well. Also, as I mentioned, Kurt will give a policy update as it relates to that. A bit of an update on the PSO team and where we're at and who you might be the most local person for you to connect with, and then as always an events update at the end. So I will hand over to Stephen Hall, who's going to kick us off with the new standards for RTOs, Registered Training Organisations. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Anthea, and joining you from Joondalup in Perth on the Whadjuk lands. And it is a beautiful blue sky here day for all my fellow West Australians. So some exciting news for all of the RTOs. I know you are waiting with bated breath for the new standards for RTOs to come out, registered training organisations. And you eagerly have been reading it and over the last couple of months trying to work out how to implement it. I will highlight, ASQA did a really great presentation on this only a couple of days ago, so some of the stuff we will talk about has already been covered. And I will probably highlight, as Anthea noted, it is a bit training heavy, but for employers, for the industry stakeholders who aren't necessarily involved in training, some of this stuff will impact you by extension. So we'll try and show how that works in a bit, but we'll jump straight into it, because when we look at the next slide, the old standards for RTOs 2015, you'll see that they had a few things in there that helped you implement it. There was a really great implementation guide. So if you were a training provider, you were able to compare that with your compliance documentation to be able to make sure that you were doing things in the right space. And probably out of that, they've now come out with these areas that still relate to what the old standards were, but probably just outline them slightly differently. And those three distinct elements: the outcome standards, the compliance requirements, and the credential policy. And in our world, in training product development, while we're not necessarily writing the assessments for RTOs and we're not looking at how you manage all of the elements that make up the standards for RTOs, we have to think about how training product design will assist you in the training space. We don't want to put things into training products that could cause issues for you as a training provider, but equally to have some clarity around how you would apply that in your day-to-day operations. And so you can sort of see on the right there some of the things that we are seeing in place already. So probably just a reminder, if you haven't popped yourself on mute, if you could
You're doing the standards for the RTOs to do with the electrical, what's happening with. Yep, I'll forward you the.
Yeah. So just a reminder, pop yourself on mute. There we go. Excellent. So we'll move to the next slide so we can start getting into it. Now, I'm going to apologize for the following slide after this one because like any bad trainer, I have overused text on my screen, but there is method to the madness in that one. But just looking a bit closer at these three distinct elements and how we think they will apply for us in training product development world. You'll see the outcome standards focusing in very heavily on training assessment, clear link to what we do in developing units of competency and qualifications, but then also the student support, the vet workforce. And as we know, we've been doing a lot of work around the vet workforce and looking at how we can improve, increase the capacity and capability within the vet workforce as part of our vet workforce plan, but also to the governance requirements. And governance, you may not necessarily think of directly related to the training products, but when we actually look at how you roll those out, we'll see those. Probably the big one in the compliance standards is going to be around the transition of training products. We're going to spend a bit of time on that. Transition is probably one of the things that we received the most feedback about, particularly the length of transition, how transition is used and utilized within training products as we move from one qualification or one training package into the next version of that training package, but also to how those old clauses in 1.26 and 1.27 in the previous standards, again, apologise for RTO speak there, but how we can look at helping you with those. But even too with the credential policy, how do you ensure that your assessors, your trainers there are suitably qualified and competent to be able to deliver? So how do they manage their vet currency as well as their industry currency? And how does training product even assist in that space? So that also then plays into where we have licensed outcomes, and we have to ensure that the training and assessing is in line with what you would expect for people who are assessing and training people who will end up with an electrical license, whether that's the full unrestricted license or some of the various limited scope licenses that are around the place. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next slide if we can. Thanks, Kaya. So a couple of things we wanted just to highlight. So in the new standards for RTOs, STROs as they're saying, there's this credential policy. So it highlights there that you have to have obviously your Cert 4 training and assessment. Everyone's accepted that for many years. We won't get into all the issues that relate to it, but certainly it's an expectation that if you're training and assessing in a vet environment, that you'll have that Cert 4 in training and assessment or be working towards it under supervision. But then when we think about how does that actually apply when you're working in that space? So the current credential that we utilize in training package, particularly where there's an electrical license or a related element to a license outcome, we have that current credential up there. And you'll see the clear link there to having that unrestricted electrician's license. For those of you who have never been across this part, we had an old grandparent clause in there that allowed people who held an electrical license to be recognised against current competencies in the qualification, so that there was no barrier to entry for post-trade qualifications. So that grandparent clause has been widely accepted over the years. It drives other training package developers nuts that we managed to get it in ours, but it serves a very important role. But equally, on the other side of that, as a trainer and assessor, if you're assessing people who are going to end up with an electrical license, you want to make sure that that person actually has a license themselves, or at least has the capacity to have that license. So that's why that current credential is the way it is. But when we're looking at potential draft ones, you can see the one down the bottom there doesn't really necessarily change a great deal. But the obligation really now in the new standards for RTOs really puts that obligation back on you as the training provider to make sure that you have done your due diligence in ensuring that that trainer and assessor has the current and correct credentials. And it's not really the training product that we can put that in. It's something that's actually beyond the training product's ability to determine. We can certainly utilize some language to assist you, and we'll be working with you over the next 12 months or so as we rewrite the units of competency for the UEE as part of that full UEE review project. But keep in mind, how do we help you meet the requirements of the standards for RTOs when it comes to ensuring the vet currency and competency of your assessors, particularly when it comes to those licensed outcomes? So there'll be a bit more work in that space as well. If we can move on to the next slide now. Thanks, Kaya. This was the one, I didn't want to mention the transition, but we're going to mention the transition. In fact, we're actually going to talk about it in a fair way. For those of you who've already had a chance to deep dive into it and have a look at it, there's an amazing thing here called a timely manner. Timely. I love a subjective term in a very objective setting. What does timely actually mean? And so we thought we'd actually give you a bit of an example, because you can see the excerpt on the right there. I don't expect you to read it all, and there'll be certainly no tests on this at the end of the presentation. But I think the two things that we really need to pick out is that a normal transition period has been accepted as being 1 year from the date of publication. So it appears on training.gov.au. Within that year, you've got to transition all your students across to the new qualification. Now, that's easier in short duration qualifications, maybe Cert 2s, maybe Cert 3s that aren't necessarily trade related. But we know that the vast majority of our Cert 3s are trade-based, so therefore you would end up with a 4-year apprenticeship, maybe a 3-year traineeship in other areas, but particularly for the electrical apprenticeship, it's a 4-year apprenticeship. So how do you then handle that when you know that there's going to be some level of disadvantage to the student? And as I said earlier, even if you're an employer dialing in, or you're on the outskirts of that world, but still have a very vested interest in it, the transition really did impact when we went from the UEE 11 package to the UEE 20 package. There was considerable costs and expenses that the training organisations had to bear. So whether it was the TAFE, the industry RTOs, the enterprise RTOs, to move from one training package to another is expensive. But also too, the impact upon the student is great. When you've got to try and explain to a student, well, you had this unit of competency, but it's now different here, and you can't really use what was that completely to meet this. So you have to do this extra part now. Well, for scheduling in an RTO world, and I'm probably sure the training managers who are dialing in, those who did scheduling of classes, are probably sitting there shaking their fist at the sky going, I remember how painful that was. Well, maybe we have a bit of a better way forward with this, but we're not sure yet. And this is something that we'll be looking to get a bit of feedback for you. I'm going to set you some homework, not to finish today, but for a later conversation around what does a timely manner look like? Because when you look on the right-hand side there, we also can possibly do extensions or transitions out to 2 years. But just more recently, ASCA have highlighted it's really the role of the JSCs to work with industry and also to help make a judgment call as to extensions beyond a standard transition period. So whether we decide on 6 months, 12 months, or 2 years, there is still the potential where there is a disadvantage to a student to use the timely function to extend that transition out. But there needs to be some rationale behind why you would do that. So when you look at the outcome standard down the bottom there of 2.1, it says vet students have access to clear and accurate information, including to make informed decisions about the training product and the RTO, and are made aware of changes that affect them. So it's actually the obligation of the RTO to make sure that vet students, so our apprentices in the program, are aware of these kind of impacts. And when you look at that next sentence, identifies changes that affect vet students, including transition of superseded, deleted, or expired training products, and they're informed as soon as practicable. Clause 1.27 again, relates to the use of superseded training products embedded in a current qualification, has been removed completely. So that's the other component. You used to be able to deliver the old one, and then that used to confuse things as well, because as we've just seen, we've re-released a number of the packages just to fix up some of those superseded units. So you'll see that there are 25 versions of some of those packages out there now, some of those qualifications. That was to fix that problem. But now it's quite clear, as soon as the new unit is in there, you have to use it. It's quite clear in how that is being spelled out. But I guess the homework that we want to set you all, and as I said, setting out there, what impact would have, or how would the standards for RTOs as it applies to the transition of qualifications used in apprenticeship systems impact you? Think about how it impacts the apprentice, the employer, because there's nothing worse than having the employer knock on your door as an RTO manager or a TAFE manager, and they're saying, "Hey, what's this? I hear my apprentice has now got to do another 2 or 3 units. They're going to be off the job and back in the training facility, and we hadn't factored that into their training contract, or it's an impact on our operations because we're relying on them being able to work for us during that time period." So there's certainly those things that have to be taken into account. But keeping in mind that timely means too that we could argue that you could release the training package, and our goal, as we know, is to have this out to you before 2027. We're looking for a 27 release of this training package. You could still be delivering that package, or the old package, the 20 package, arguably in 2031. And considering the technology changes, and a lot of the work that the JSCs have on our remit was to be more agile, to get product out there quicker so that we can address the changing technology needs of industry, it would almost go counterintuitive to then say, oh, but we can extend this because we don't want to disadvantage the student. How can we work better in that space? So your homework, which I'll come and check back on you at the next Insights meeting, is have a review of those and feed it back to us as the implications it has for your industry, for your RTO in particular, and how we can minimise the impact on our apprentices as well as our employers, and of course you as our training providers as well. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. Any questions?
Thanks, Steve. If after this call you have a question, please feel free to reach out to us. Also, throughout any of the presentations today, feel free to pop a question into the chat or put your virtual hand up. We love these sessions to be conversational, and actively encourage you to ask questions where you have them. So thanks, Steve. I'll hand over now to Philip Dodd, who is going to walk us through the next set of changes that's happening in our world. Thanks,
exactly.
Phil.
Thanks, Anthea. And as you sort of mentioned in the beginning, this is the sort of area where we give that training product update. But I thought it was sort of timely because Steve was giving that component on the RTO standards that it's probably a good opportunity to have a look at the other piece of legislation that came in July, and that was around the training package organising framework. Now, just remember that, haven't forgotten about our training products. All the updates are available on our website. They're updated regularly, so please jump onto the website. You can review that any time. And of course, if there's time at the end, happy to take questions around, what I covered today, or even some of those training product questions if you've got any burning ones. And we do have some of the team members in the chat there. If you were waiting for us to talk about a particular project, you had a question, put it into the chat, and one of the team members should be able to answer that while I'm going through the next group of slides. Thanks. So as I mentioned there, that the piece of documentation that came to us is the training package organising framework. We call it the TPOF for short. Got to have a good acronym as everybody else does. And look, I'm not going to get too technical, but I think it's pretty important, and it'll give you a good insight on how we go about the development process and some of the things that have come into play. And Anthea mentioned about qualification reform, but some of those things that have come into play with the changes that have taken place within the templates that we need to work through. So the TPOF sets out all of that information. In a nutshell, it's basically combined these 3 documents that we had before, the TPP, DETP. No. So look, we had all those lovely acronyms, so we've just changed it to one now, which is the TPOP. But look, it sets out all the training product requirements, the design rules, and outlines the processes for that we at PSO need to go through when we go developing and modifying the training products. And it sets us up or outlines that process, what we need to go through the endorsement process. And look, it's not just PSO that need to follow the TPOF. That's all of the JSEs need to go through that process. Thanks, Kaya. So you've probably heard a little bit of this before, and you've probably heard us talk about this, but the new framework really embeds that purpose-driven approach to qualifications that we're going to put out there. It aligns to the new quality principles, and we'll go through the principles in the next slide. But what we need to be doing is that looking at those 3 purposes, and those 3 purposes were defined at a national level and included in the TPOF, and I've sort of summarised them a bit there, so you can have a bit of a look at them, the 3 different purposes. And it's quite important because as we go through the process, our technical committees will look at the purpose of a qualification. So it's probably one of the first things we actually do. We look at the purpose of a qualification, see what the outcome of that qualification is, then we build on that moving forward. So we're not starting with units of competency or throwing more units of competency into existing qualifications. We're looking at that qualification and seeing what is the purpose, what is the outcome of that, and the industry and the occupational outcomes, so that we're very clear about that as we move through. We need to, as we go through that development process, we need to put a purpose statement up for our qualifications, our new qualifications and training products that we're doing. And also, when we do submit our products to the assurance to get approved, we need to put that purpose statement in there, and some wording around that. So very important that we get that purpose right. We move on to the next slide. And those quality principles, we had some quality principles in the last training package documentation, but these are the new ones. And while we talk about, the RTOs and making it better for RTOs, but we've got to meet the needs of learners and industry. That's why we're building out these training packages. And Steve mentioned about making sure that the wording is correct and making it deliverable for RTOs, but the outcomes is what the learners are taking out into industry. We've got to align with our national skills and workforce priorities, making sure that we're supporting the pathways into further education and employment, the portability of these skills, and supporting equity and inclusivity as well. Some of the big things about, duplication and efficiency of the qualifications. So as we go through those reviews, we'll be making sure that we're not just duplicating stuff that's already out there, and making sure that the qualifications are fit for purpose. And the big one down the bottom is that we're complying with our training package policy and standards. Thanks. That's right. So what does that mean for PSO as we move into some significant changes? You've probably heard that we're moving into our full UEE review. I won't go into how many qualifications that takes and how many units of competency that we're talking about there. But what we got from our stakeholders is that we just don't want a revised version of what we had before. You know, we want to see our new technologies in there. We want to see differences in there and move forward. So those tools are in place now. We have new qualification template where we need to look at those purposes I was talking about, those quality principles, and aligning them up. We're going to be looking at the new units of competency templates, which gives us options, you know, to move away from performance and elements criteria, you know, just stuck in one template. It gives us some options to look at different ways that delivery might happen to make the outcomes. Some new guidelines for the companion volumes and implementation guides. Some of the feedback we got, and I don't think it's any secret that the implementation guides are just pushed to one side. Jura have made it clear to us that as we bring new products into the market, that we need to show how they were meant to be implemented. You know, how are you supposed to be using those products when they're there to be delivered? And of course, one thing that has come about with the JSCs and the JSA is better data and analysis. You know, we're doing it from a better state because we have all that information in the background to help us provide these better products. And as we move on to the next one. All right, so the training products themselves, and once again, I won't get too technical in there and I won't get too caught up in there, but if we look at the qualification, you know, as I've mentioned, that we need to be looking at the purpose of the qualification and what the outcomes are. We're going to be looking to see that we're aligning the ASCF levels, the qualification framework levels. You know, have we got qualification that is suitable for a Cert 3, is actually a Cert 3? Are our advanced diplomas aimed at an advanced diploma level? You know, have we got the makeup of the qualification right? Have we got a pathway that you can follow from Cert 2 through to advanced diploma? And some might say that those pathways are a little bit stifled at the moment. You know, it's not clear how you can move through those different levels. And, you know, I've been using a saying in our recent tag meetings that, you know, we have units of competency that are delivered at a Cert 2 level that sit in advanced diploma levels with no guidance around that, or why is a Cert 2 sitting in advanced diploma. There might be nothing wrong with it, but we don't have that information about why these things are happening in the background. And I did mention about the implementation guides to make, when we bring the new products into being, a lot better and a lot more information out there on how we see the delivery. Look, and when we go into those units of competency, and I did mention about the 2 templates that we have choices of to use now, and the technical. So when we come down to the qualifications and the units of competency, our technical committees that are made up of all our stakeholders are the ones that will be helping us with these decisions, or making a lot of these decisions about purposes, AQF levels, implementation guides. And when we move into those units of competency, we can have those wider discussions about templates. Should it be the application of knowledge and skills template, or should it be the elements and performance criteria template? We have the opportunity to look at the titles of our units of competency. You know, do they match the application of what the unit is? You know, some might say that you look at a unit of competency, you look at the title and you go, how does that really reflect what that unit of competency is about? Some people have even come to us with talking about the units of competency, just dropping the the AQF level away from the unit of competency has made a big change to some people, that they can't immediately see what level that unit of competency was first packaged at. We'll be revising the application statements, making sure that, it is what the unit is saying is what the outcome of the unit is. Foundation skills has also come up quite a lot. Foundation skills is now mandatory when we're talking about a qualification. We must have the foundation skills in there. Digital literacy has been a big one as well. The foundation skills in the qualification mention about digital literacy. So can we add that digital literacy in? But it is an optional field when it comes to a unit of competency. But the early feedback that we're getting at Powering Your Skills is that having foundation skills in at a unit level would really assist in the delivery and some of the compliance components of a unit of competency. So, they're the types of discussions we'll have. Prerequisites. Are there too many? Are there not enough? That argument might go on backwards and forwards for a long time, but they're the opportunities that we have a look at. Knowledge and skills statements come up, and as I said, I'm trying not to get too technical, but those people in the RTO land will know when I mention about these knowledge and skill statements. And a famous one that sits in our units, or a lot of our units of competency, is that such and such must be completed on 2 occasions and include the elements and performance and criteria and the range of conditions and so forth and so forth. We'll be able to revisit those. The templates don't mandate that we have to have that particular statement in there, but these are the discussions that we can have as a stakeholder group to know what's going to make the units of competency. And Steve mentioned this a little bit earlier on, but so there's an understanding of how a unit of competency comes together, and what's written in there, everybody knows what it means. It's not a secret to what the evidence is, or that you need to complete to be competent in a unit of competency. And that flows on to the actual what everyone would call the dot points in those knowledge and skills ones. Are they written in clean English? Is it concise? Does it have the correct level of specification? Is there too much specification? Is there not enough? And even to the point of what person or what voice are we writing those statements in? Are we using the right verbs when we describe what we need to be done? And I'll just move on with the last couple there, which is the range of conditions. Again, not a mandatory field, but we can look at whether those range of conditions are required and will it help in the delivery of the unit. And also the assessment conditions. Everyone understands, and even Steve pointed this out, that you must hold, a trainer must hold the Cert 4 and abide by the standards of RTOs. But what conditions do we need when we're making those assessment decisions, or what takes place? So a few changes taking place, a few things that we're hoping will make these training products a lot better in the delivery. And just to finish off, I suppose you probably hear this message a lot from PSO, but look, when our things go out for consultation, when our products are out for consultation, please provide that feedback. We don't need all positive feedback. We can take all of the feedback, but please provide that feedback to us, and jump in and respond when these products are up for consultation. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. We've got a few questions in the chat, so let's have a look at that so we can talk it through.
Certainly.
So let me scroll back up. So Peter Collins, thank you. The big RTO problem is the new qualification is available. We then need to get it on scope, which takes a considerable amount of time, which, look, we recognise that. Absolutely. When the replacement qualification is equivalent, it is automatic, but they always end up being not equivalent. Can we get ASQA to view equivalence at the occupation outcome, as in UEE 30820, gets you the ability to become a licensed electrician? but so will UEE 3827. This way, an RTO can develop units in a timely manner prior to training them, not all units at once, as the last 3 transitions has caused. And Brett, I see that you've responded, Brett Willowhite from PSO. There are several considerations with equivalency, but employment outcomes are certainly one of them. It really depends on how significant the changes are. And look, and I think that last statement is kind of the point and the parameters that we have to operate under in terms of equivalent and not equivalent. But Phil, I'll hand over to you and Steve, potentially, if you're interested in weighing into this conversation.
Yeah, it probably falls a little bit into yours, but Steve, as well, with that transition, doesn't it? The equivalency it'll be discussed at that technical committee level. We can't really go in there and say, is it going to be equivalent now or is not equivalent? It will depend on, how we go through that development process and what those outcomes are when we go and look into it.
And
Steve,
probably just add to that as well. So we can't walk away from an obligation that as a Jobs and Skills Council, we have one of our key pillars is the implementation, promotion and monitoring of new training products. So we're not just going to hand it to you and go, hey, all the best. Look, one of the things that we may be able to do, like I said, this is all a bit hypothetical at the moment until we actually get a bit further along with it. But if there is a substantial change from one unit to another unit, clearly we can help with developing something that might be a transitional unit that will help you get across that line, and then you can continue to train the full qual later on. On the flip side of that too, in terms of equivalency, well, I did mention about the old grandparent clause where if you hold an electrician's license, you've got that. So we have got some mechanisms in place that we could potentially use to help with this. But having lived with the transition before and experienced it firsthand, I'm very aware of the RTO's position and how hard it is and those implications it places upon not just the apprentice, but also the employer. So when we think of that tripartite arrangement between the apprentice, the employer and the training provider under a training agreement, we've got to get that right. So I don't have a definitive answer for you now, but it's certainly on our radar and forms part of all of our decision making as we develop these.
I think one of the other things one of the roles that we play in the system that we're still starting to roll out, because it's the next step, is in that implementation, promotion and monitoring pillar that we have as part of our key core work, where there are issues of non-equivalency, or if it's a brand new unit, or there's a number of factors, we actually have a role to play to help build out teaching materials, potentially curriculum, looking at the companion guides, so that we see, particularly for the full review of the UEE, because it's a massive undertaking. We're super excited about it, but there's a lot, and we want to get this right because we acknowledge it's not being done particularly well the last few iterations. But I think one of the differences that we have to help support the training system is with that implementation, that gamut of implementation tools that we will continue to work on to get this rolled out as efficiently as possible.
Can I jump in? There's another question there, Anthea, just around the superseded units. I think we'll go away and we'll come back to you with a more clarified answer. To be fair, the removal of clause 1.27 in the old standards, which is the one that referred to the utilisation of those superseded units embedded, has been removed in the new standards. So you might read that 2 different ways. So how about we'll go back and we'll get clarification exactly from ASQA how they interpret that, but equally to how we can ensure that gets played out correctly, because clearly that's going to impact a few qualifications that are sitting around the place at the moment. So rather than do anything and give you wrong advice, we'll go back and get some more advice on that one, because clearly there's different views on that.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Phil. Kaya and Nikita, can we just take an action that maybe we get that updated through Energize, through our newsletter? If you're I'm assuming most people on this call receive our monthly newsletter, Energize. We'll post that clarification in that newsletter. So please let us know if you are not registered to receive it, and look, totally understand if you don't want to sign up for another email newsletter. We can also provide that to you directly if you don't receive Energize. Okay, thanks so much, Steve and Phil. There's a lot changing, and we think for the positive. There's always some curveballs in there, but we'll continue to work through it and figure it out as we go, and make sure that we're doing what we can to support all of you as well. I will hand now over to Peter Adams. Peter, over to you with the productivity and economic reform update.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Anthea. Really appreciate it. Yes, everyone, thank you. Look, it's been really the buzzword sort of going around at the moment, productivity. And, the Albanese government has flagged that boosting productivity as a major economic focus of its second term agenda. So we're keen to really start the conversation here today and start to build a bit of a benchmark of knowledge across the group and across our stakeholder network, so that we can ensure that within these productivity discussions that your voices are heard within those. So really keen today to give you a bit of an overview of what's happening at the moment and what that looks like. We can try to answer any questions as we go, but I'll also flag as well that, equally PSO are early on in our journey around this topic. So we're certainly undertaking a range of research and development internally as well, so that we can better contribute to these discussions. So look, broadly, productivity growth is the key driver of real wage growth and rising living standards over the longer term. But we've seen significant slowing and stagnation since around the mid 2000s. Australia's productivity growth in the decade to 2020 was the slowest in 60 years. So, we're really seeing that stagnation there, which is having a really big effect on the economy and people more broadly. Lots of long-standing factors that are really contributing to that, reduced dynamicism across the work that we're undertaking, competitive pressures, slower diffusion of technological innovations, and a range of other factors. And then we've got some challenges that are emerging as well in terms of aging population, rising demand for care, support service needs, and really large transformations around technological and digital platforms and technologies, and climate change and the transition to net zero more broadly. So we've got some really interesting factors going on there that are contributing to this and are really, I guess, bringing this to the fore. And for the energy sector, we can really look at three different facets of productivity. We can look at productivity of the resource, so how we use energy and the efficiency of our use of energy, and that can have a really big impact on workforce and the skills required, both positive and negative. If we can create a more efficient energy system and usage of energy, then we might need less workers in the longer term to maintain it. But equally, as we undertake those technologies and as we drive that change in efficiency of energy, we'll see a larger need for workforce to implement that infrastructure that's required. So some really interesting parameters going on there. Secondly, there's productivity of the workforce, predominantly through having a highly skilled workforce that can work productively and contribute in a productive manner. And then we also have, as a third stream, productivity of the projects and the systems that sit behind that. So, when we have a major energy project that's being stood up, what's the process that they have to go through to deliver that project, and what does the productivity of that process look like? So some really interesting sort of facets there for the energy sector. The Federal Productivity Commission has been tasked to identify some priority reform areas, and they're really looking at 5 pillars of productivity, and you can see them on the screen there. And broadly, I think we can all acknowledge that several of them are really critical to us, but really probably most apply. Certainly in terms of creating a more dynamic and resilient economy, really big ticket one for us will be building that skilled and adaptable workforce. Obviously aligns really directly with the work that we as a JSC undertake. Harnessing data and digital technology will certainly have a really big impact for the sector. Delivering quality care more efficiently, less so for us. And the final one, the fifth pillar, obviously really direct correlation as well in terms of investing in cheaper, cleaner energy and the net zero transformation. So the Productivity Commission started off with over 500 ideas late last year that they've been working through and holding some public consultations through May and June of this year. The interim reports on those inquiries are just about to be released. So we'll have some dates that will pop up and some links that I'll drop in the chat now. It will give you a bit of an insight onto those inquiries related to several of those pillars. But it's really important to note as well that the Productivity Commission's recommendations that might come out of all of this might not necessarily be adopted by government. So really key thing to, I guess, keep in mind there. And in terms of, I guess, some really visible work that's going on in this space that we can see already, the federal government's proposed national licensing scheme for electricians is one of these measures which has really been driven by this process, and funding to support it will come from a $900 million National Productivity Fund. So next we're going to have a little bit of a look at two of the pillars. Pillar two, so, why is a skilled and adaptable workforce important? I think, it really speaks for itself. We've got 27 million people in Australia, and more than ever, the success for our economy depends on the ability to utilise and develop new technology and ideas and to perform that skilled work in a dynamic way. Our education system really needs to be at the forefront of this, developing the skills and knowledge that are required and really creating that foundation and a culture of lifelong learning, which is a really critical aspect of this. How do we make sure that not only is our workforce being skilled in the first place, but are then growing and adapting those skills to those new technologies as they emerge? Really critical. So you can see three reform areas there that the productivity agenda will look at or will take a little bit of a focus on. PSO will be looking to contribute to the productivity discussions, especially as they relate to workforce and skills in the sector. But again, we are at the early point in our journey in this space as well. So as we have more conversations and undertake more engagement as an organisation, we'll be really keen to hear from you on these points. But largely through the workforce plan we've been developing, a lot of these themes are already emerging, and I think the industry's got a really good handle on, even if we haven't been referring to it as productivity previously, but what some of those actions and projects are required to really drive more efficiency in this space. But I will say there's a really big but to that. And, through all of this, retaining a focus on the human aspect, retaining a focus on safety and retaining a focus on quality is going to be really critical. If we achieve productivity at the loss of those three aspects, then, moot point, we've failed. So really important that we retain that human focus. The interim report webinar for this stream, for this pillar, will be released on the 14th of August, and I've dropped the link to that in the chat. So if you're interested in this, please do get along. And we'll have a super quick look at pillar 5 as well, if we could change slide, Kaya. Perfect, thank you. So pillar 5, you can see there, investing in cheaper, cleaner energy and the net zero transformation. You can see the reform areas that are focused on within this pillar. Really a little bit more focused on that third stream that I spoke about at the start around productivity of projects and productivity of systems, and that more process sort of driven productivity. So reducing the cost of meeting carbon targets, speeding up approvals for new energy infrastructure, and encouraging adaptation by addressing barriers to private investment. I'd say where this links in really heavily with the workforce side of things from our perspective. One of the really critical messages we've heard through the workforce plan engagement is around the need for there to be confidence from industry that this work is coming through the pipeline, for them to make apprenticeship opportunities available and to see that significant growth in workforce that's required. So making this side of things work more efficiently and more effectively will allow that pipeline to open up a little bit more, which will pass on that confidence to industry to employ the volume of apprentices and workforce that we really need to see. Interim report webinar on this one is in 8th of August, so coming up really soon. Again, links in the chat. Anthea.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to say too, whether we bring it to the next Insights or the one after, it will depend on timing. But all of the Jobs and Skills Councils, the CEO Network, have a debrief directly about the outputs of the productivity roundtable on the 21st of August. So as I mentioned at the start, there is likely to be a number of things that are that filter through and impact the JSC's program of work. So I'll bring that update back to the next Insights if I can, if it times appropriately. If not, definitely the September one. Thanks, Peter. That was really interesting. I'll hand over to Kurt now. Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks, Pete and Anthea. Good afternoon, everyone. Just another quick policy update. So as part of our work on the 2025 Workforce Plan, PSO has been mapping the policy levers that could potentially help us bring to life many of the solutions that have emerged through our consultation process. So in looking at some of the possible policy recommendations, we've also come across some emerging government initiatives that support the same themes and aim to tackle some of the barriers that have also been identified in the workforce plan. So today, one of the good little examples that I'll give you an overview today on is the $91 million clean energy workforce package that was announced as part of the 2024-25 federal budget. So just to give you a bit of an overview, this funding was designed to help grow and upskill the clean energy workforce, and this included $50 million for a new capital and equipment investment fund, which was to go towards facility upgrades that expand clean energy training capacity across wind, solar, pumped hydro, grid battery storage, energy networks, and hydrogen, as well as key electrical and construction trades. So funding will be directed to facilities at capacity in instances where that's preventing people from entering apprenticeships. And they also have a particular focus on facilities in regional, rural, and remote communities experiencing workforce transitions. So at this point, publicly available information on this fund is still quite limited, but the government is expected to announce what projects will be funded in the 2025-26 financial year. The package also has another $30 million dedicated to what, in the government's words, call a initiative to turbocharge the vocational education training teacher, trainer, and assessor workforce for clean energy. So in a nutshell, the government says this funding is about two things: making sure we've got enough teachers and making it easier for skilled professionals to move between working in industry and teaching at RTOs. So like the other fund, there's not much public detail yet on what projects this will fund, but it's likely to involve co-funding a range of state-based initiatives. And these kind of initiatives take time to set up from a funding perspective. So we'll probably get an update on that in the near future too. The package also has a range of smaller initiatives, and this includes $3.1 million to promote careers in the clean energy sector and make people aware of the training opportunities and incentives available. There's also a preliminary study on using Australia's international education sector to tackle critical skills shortages through work-integrated learning and apprentices where domestic training capacity permits. And there's also a GTO reimbursement program to help small and medium businesses take on clean energy construction and manufacturing apprentices in a priority occupation through access to GTO services. So there's about up to 1,500 in annual reimbursements available over the life of an apprenticeship. The program started in January and it's demand driven, but it's capped at 400 reimbursement places nationwide, and about 20% of those have been reserved for female apprentices. So, just last month in a speech, the Minister for Skills and Training, Andrew Giles, said there'd been strong take up on this program, and they're confident they're on track to hit the 400 places. So this $91 million package isn't a silver bullet, but it does closely align with what we've heard through the workforce plan consultation, especially around trainer shortages, the need to improve how VET is seen by career influencers, and the need for better investment in training infrastructure. So instead of duplicating what's already there, PSO will be focusing on where the gaps are, what's working, and how we can build on or refine what's already in place. So we'll be continuing to track these programs and working with government to make sure the policy settings stay fit for purpose as the sector's workforce needs continue to evolve. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Kurt. Appreciate that, and loving the policy updates each month. Thank you. We have 4 minutes left. This slide left me speechless when I saw it for the first time yesterday when we were doing a bit of a practice, because we've grown so much and we are continuing to grow. There's no change of pace for any of us at PSO, but I was really quite blown away by how big we've become and really how the national footprint is starting to really expand. We still have some lonely hearts clubs in Northern Territory and Western Australia, but I think that's how they like it. If I'm being honest, but it's just it blew my mind to see just how big we've become and that we're still growing. So obviously we are recruiting for some key roles. You've probably seen that. Always happy to look across Australia. From my perspective, as long as you have access to an airport, whether it's a capital city or a regional airport, then you've got a shot. So just wanted to showcase that we really do have a great national coverage across Australia. So super excited about that. And it's very rare that I'm speechless. I think most of you all know that too. A quick events update. We have just completed the most recent round of our technical advisory groups. Thank you so much to everyone who participated. They are actually a lifeblood of how of our pipeline of work. So we really appreciate people giving their time to share their knowledge. Similarly, our Strategic Industry Advisory Body, our SIAB, and sorry that we didn't de-acronym this page, we've got the next one coming up Tuesday the 26th of August, being located in Brisbane. And very excitingly, 2 days after that, we're off to Canberra to launch our workforce plan. So keep an eye out. We will be sending comms out on that day with a link. It will be posted to our website, and fingers crossed we get some good media coverage. The next Insights is scheduled for end of August. We don't have a specific date, but we will make sure that that gets in your calendar real soon. We're excited to kick off our next round of roadshows. They kick off in Brisbane in November and they'll run through to May. A similar format to the last set of roadshows, which we do aim to run every 2 years. And in the intervening years, we'll run a bigger summit conference like we did at the beginning of this year. So we love getting out and about and coming to where you are located and meeting you where you are. So watch this space for those dates to be released. We're just finalising venues and a few other bits and bobs. So a lot happening from PSO. Thank you again for giving up an hour of your time. There's a number of ways to connect with us. As mentioned, and a few people asked in the chat, this gets posted to our website every month, the recording, and the slide pack is available as well. So once again, thank you all. We've got a minute to spare. Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great afternoon and a very safe Friday and weekend. Take care.